On the communicators, House Energy and Commerce Committee Ranking Member Joe Barton on the future of telecommunications and technology policy under a Republican-controlled House of Representatives.
With the Republicans in the majority in the 112th Congress, which convenes on January 3, 2011, legislative agendas will change, as will committee chairmanships. And the chairmanship of the Energy and Commerce Committee, which deals with telecommunications policy, is being contested. One of those running for the chairmanship is Congressman Joe Barton, who is currently the chief Republican on the Energy and Commerce Committee. And he's our guest this week on The Communicators. Congressman Barton, thank you for joining us from Dallas. Why do you want to be chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee again? And if so, what would be your legislative agenda when it comes to telecommunications policy?
I think the American people Tuesday gave Republicans a second chance. You don't get too many second chances in politics, but the American people have given the Republicans one. I was chairman the last time that the Republicans were in the majority back in 2005 and 2006. And I think, the bills that passed and became law, we passed an Energy Policy Act that was comprehensive. We passed the first Reform Act for the National Institute of Health in probably 30 years. We reauthorized the Ryan White AIDS Act. We just did a lot of what I thought were very positive things, and we did it in a bipartisan fashion. If I am given the privilege to be chairman again in the next Congress by the Republican conference, I want to actually deliver on the promises that we made in our Pledge to America. First and foremost is repealing the new health care law that most people generically call Obamacare. Most of that will come through the Energy and Commerce Committee. Not all of it. Some of it is Ways and Means and other committees. But the lion's share is Energy and Commerce. So my first priority would be to repeal that and follow up very quickly with a replace and reform package that really addresses the health care needs of America. I think we have to do more than just repeal, go back to status quo. I think we also have to replace and improve the system so that every American has access to qualified health care. In telecommunication policy, I think it is imperative that we maintain the freedom of the internet. I do not agree with the FCC's attempt to regulate the internet through Title II. We can certainly move legislation making that crystal clear that they don't have that authority. So we'll be doing aggressive oversight over the FCC, and if we can get a bipartisan agreement, I'm very open to reforming the Universal Service Fund. I think it's long overdue, and I think Congressman Stearns and Congressman Boucher in the last Congress, the bill that they drafted together is a good first step or a good base on which to begin the legislative process there. But I guess just kind of generically, the reason that I would like to be chairman is I want to create a federal system that gives every American an opportunity to better themselves and their family, and to do so on a level playing field. I don't support government mandates in all areas of our economy. I don't support the government telling people what they can and can't do, except when it's necessary to protect the public health, public safety, and on occasion to provide for the common defense of this nation. So I'm a free market conservative, and I think if given the privilege to be the chairman, you'll see a very activist Energy and Commerce Committee, but you'll see an open, transparent committee that works in a bipartisan fashion.
Given the Republican conference's rules on term limits, what's the process that you could get elected and appointed chairman again of the committee when it comes to, do you need a waiver?
Well, thank you for asking that question. Not many people bother to want to know the answer to that. We passed a rule in 1993 when we were in the minority, before winning the majority in 1994, that says you can be ranking member or chairman for 3 terms. When that rule was put into place, the Republicans had not been in the majority in the House since 1954. So we put the term ranking member in there because that's all that we had. When we won with the Contract America and Newt Gingrich in 1994, we had 11 ranking members at the time who became chairman. 5 of those had served as ranking member for 3 terms, and all 5 of those served as chairman for 3 terms. So we had the same rule in place in 1994 that we have now. We didn't apply the ranking member time towards their chairmanship time. I interpret the rule to be that I've served 1 full term as chairman, so I am eligible, not entitled, but eligible to be chairman for 2 more terms. I'm going to ask the steering committee, the Republican leadership, and the conference to clarify the rule. I'm fine on having a term limit rule for chairman. I wouldn't have gotten to be chairman when I did if we hadn't have had term limits on chairman, because Chairman Bliley and Chairman Tozan, I think one or both of them probably would petition to continue to be chairman. So I'm an advocate of term limits, but I think you apply it in your majority time, and I don't think it's a consecutive minority majority. But that's a rule clarification. So I think I'm eligible for 2 more terms. I'm going to petition on that process. If that's not successful, then I will ask for a waiver, and I think I'll be successful on the waiver. But that's the process is we have a transition team that puts a rules package together, try to get the rule clarified in the transition, and then if necessary put it before the conference to have a vote, and then whatever the rule is, play by that rule.
Joining us on the Communicators this week as our guest reporter is the editor of National Journal's Tech Daily Dose, Juliana Grunwald.
Hi, Mr. Barton. What kind of feedback are you getting from Mr. Boehner and the other Republican leaders on seeking this interpretation of the rules?
Well, I'm getting very positive feedback in terms of support for chairmanship. In terms of a clarification of the rule, what John Boehner has said, and also some of the other senior Republicans, is that something to take up with the transition team. And Greg Waldron, who's on the Energy and Commerce Committee, is in charge of it. There's also the Republican Study Committee. The current chairman is Tom Price. We haven't picked on the study committee who our new chairman's going to be, but it appears that it's going to be Congressman Jordan. They're looking at some rule changes also. So, but the straight answer to your question is, in my outreach effort, I'm being very, very positively received for my chairmanship. In terms of the rule, that's something that the transition team is going to make a recommendation to the leadership and then to the full conference.
Now, Congressman Barton, election night here in Washington, D.C., as John Boehner was finishing his speech, we happened to notice you at the bottom of the stage shaking hands with presumptive Speaker Boehner right there. What were you doing in Washington that night? What's your relationship with John Boehner?
Well, my relationship with John Boehner is very positive and very cordial. We worked together when he was chairman of the Education Committee, and we've worked together both as when he was majority leader and then in the minority leadership position. So we're both very positive, and we're also what I would say we're both adults. We've both been around the block a little bit and know that it's not necessarily what's good for either one of us individually, it's what's good for the entire Republican conference. So we've got a very positive, open relationship. As to why I was in Washington, in 1994, I stayed in my district on election night, and I didn't think we would ever go back into the minority, but as we got closer to this election and it looked like that we might get back in the majority, I said I want to be in Washington to share in that moment, and I was very pleased to be at the NRCC with Pete Sessions and Kevin McCarthy, and then to go over to the hotel when they made the big announcement. I just wanted to be there to share in it, because I had a feeling that we were going to win and win big, and I wanted to be a part of that celebration. And in terms of my congratulations to Speaker-to-be Boehner, I'm one of the first persons who had the sticker, John Boehner for Speaker, and I just congratulated him and also told him to get a little bit of rest, because I can't tell you how many campaign stops he had made, but he probably set a record for campaign stops for members of Congress, and I told him to go, he and his wife, to go and get some rest and kind of enjoy the moment, because you won't have too many like that.
Juliana Grunwald.
Mr. Barton, the committee, if you're chairman, the committee has a broad jurisdiction. Where will tech and telecom issues fall on the committee's priorities?
The number one immediate priority is going to be health care, because of the emphasis on repealing Obamacare and then replacing it with something that's much more in tune with what the American people want. Telecommunications is going to be a high priority, especially preventing the FCC from regulating the internet. And as I said earlier, if we can put together a bipartisan reform package on the Universal Service Fund, I think that'd be something that we could move. So healthcare would be number one. I'd say energy and telco would be kind of co-equal number two, and then oversight. We're one of the committees that has a specific oversight subcommittee, and it's going to be very, very busy, just having oversight over the various agencies in the Obama administration that are within the jurisdiction of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
You recently said that privacy was an issue of importance to you. Would you be writing a privacy bill, or would you pick up where Mr. Boucher and Mr. Stearns left off? Also, Bobby Rush, who's also on the committee, has a bill, and is he somebody you can work with?
Sure. I was a little bit surprised, or have been, that we haven't moved a privacy bill in this Congress. Of course, we have probably one more week in the lame duck, but I doubt that there's going to be a privacy bill come out that quickly. So that is certainly something that we can work with our friends on the Democrat side on a bipartisan basis. And as you pointed out, Ed Markey, Bobby Rush, Cliff Stearns, Mary Bono, there are a number of Republicans and Democrats that are very interested in that, and I think that's something that we can work on. This, we certainly have the issue. Facebook has recently admitted that some of their information on individuals was used, they claim, perhaps without Facebook's permission. We've had a number of other companies that have, depending on who you believe, consciously or inadvertently allowed very private information to be disseminated to marketers and folks without the permission of the individual. So I think privacy is one of those issues that's gaining in importance, and is something that certainly could be addressed. And if we can get the right coalition together, as chairman, I'd certainly very, very willing to legislate in that area.
And Mr. Barton, you talked about coalitions in your letter to incoming freshmen, GOP freshmen campaigning for the chairmanship. You've written, "I've worked hard to earn a reputation for fairness in dealing with policy opponents, but when I am chairman, you won't find many Democrats applauding."
Well, that's more in reference to the cabinet heads in the Obama administration. it goes without saying that when your president is of your party, you're not as aggressive in overseeing the presidential executive agencies as when the president is of the opposition. Chairman Waxman and before him Chairman Dingell are both very aggressive overseers, but they focus their oversight out into the country. They really didn't, in my opinion, adequately oversee the Obama administration. We're not going to be punitive, but we are going to insist that all these executive orders and these pending regulations and some of the actions that the EPA and the FCC and the FDA have initiated, that they're going to have to come before Congress in an open, transparent fashion and justify that. So those are the folks that will be a little unhappy. I really don't think the Democrats on the committee are going to be unhappy because they're going to be a part of the process and fully engaged, and the hearings will be fair and balanced, and it'll be their decision whether to participate, but my guess is that they will.
You mentioned,
as they should.
You mentioned the FCC and Chairman Ganikowski's proposal to reclassify broadband as a telecommunications service. Do you think that they will be under more pressure to move forward with that now that Republicans have control of the House, and the chances of a net neutrality bill coming out of Congress are definitely smaller? And you mentioned legislation. Will you move legislation to block them from doing that?
Well, I would think that they can read election returns as well as anybody. The 3 Democrat commissioners on the FCC are very bright people. I happen to have a very positive personal relationship with all 3 of them, and I would think that, seeing that the Republicans have gained 6 or 7 seats in the Senate, and as of this program, I think we're at plus 63, 64 House seats. That they would see the wisdom of not trying to regulate the internet under Title II. I am certainly willing, in conjunction with coordination with Speaker Boehner and Majority Leader Cantor, willing to move a bill pretty quickly that says they can't. But I would think they could read the tea leaves as well as anybody and know that that's something they shouldn't go forward with.
Congressman Barton, on election night here on C-SPAN, we were taking calls all night, as you well know. We take calls, and we were talking about legislative agenda of the Republicans and the Democrats. A couple of callers brought up the issue of net neutrality. I want to play one for you and get your response to this.
I'm 20 years old. I'm a bit of a younger voter, and I want to talk about a specific issue that's, I think, often overlooked by both parties, which is net neutrality. I think this is one of the biggest issues of our time, definitely a First Amendment issue. And I think a lot of the time Republicans seem to talk a lot about how they want to keep the Constitution. They seem to talk a lot about how that's like kind of their forerunning thing. But I notice that the Republicans often overlook this as an issue and would rather let the internet become tiered.
Congressman Barton?
Well, I wish I had been on when that young man was asking his phone call or engaged in his phone call. Republicans have insisted since the Telecommunications Act of 1996 that the internet be open and free and accessible, freely accessible to any and all comers. We don't allow any taxation of the internet. We have an open access policy. Internet use has exploded, as has cell phone use. So I think our policy of allowing the private sector to develop it under rules and regulations developed by the FCC that are open and transparent has worked very, very well. This concept of net neutrality is a little bit of a misnomer. What it means in practice, if the FCC were to implement it, is that the federal government could regulate the internet. And I don't think that caller wants the internet regulated by the FCC. And I know the new Republican majority in Congress on the House side doesn't want the internet regulated by the FCC. So we've got a policy that's working very, very well. You know, in the old colloquial phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's kind of where I am, and I think the majority of the Republicans are.
There was an April appeals court decision that put the FCC's authority over broadband into doubt. Do you think that there needs to be any legislation to clarify their authority? I mean, should they have some role in overseeing what broadband providers do? I mean, is there a role for Congress there?
Well, that's a rephrasing of the question we've already had several times. What happened was that the FCC tried to stipulate that it could regulate and it could command a private company, I believe it was Comcast, and tell them how to manage their network. And the courts said no, that under the Telecommunications Act, you don't have that authority. So the response of Chairman Janikowski to that court decision has been to threaten to regulate under Title II of the Federal Communications Act. And Title II is that section that regulates the old hardline telephone service, going back to the 1930s and 1940s, when you had a monopoly situation because of technology and geography, and telephone service was considered to be a natural monopoly, and so you had to regulate it to keep the companies from exercising too much market power and too much economic power over their subscribers. Well, you don't have that situation in the internet. You've got numerous broadband providers, both in terms of wireless and wired, and very robust competition, providing new services almost on a weekly basis. So there's just not the necessity to regulate under Title II, and if necessary, as I've already said, we'll move a bill very quickly, and it will be a bipartisan bill. In the current Congress, I think every Republican from John Boehner on down has signed a letter that we shouldn't regulate the internet under Title II. And I can't give you the exact count of Democrats, but I think in the neighborhood of 60 Democrats in this Congress have signed that letter or a very similar letter. So there's obviously a bipartisan majority against regulating broadband under Title II of the Federal Communications Act.
You mentioned oversight would be an important role of the committee. The FTC recently informed Google that it was dropping an investigation into what Google called the mistaken collection of information from unsecured Wi-Fi networks. Is that something? Critics of the FTC's decision have been calling on Congress to look into this issue. Is that something that you think that your committee would look into if you were chairman?
That's again, very similar to a question about privacy that you've already asked in this interview, and the answer to that is yes. It's the Google thing is very troubling. In that case, there appears to have been a conscious effort to collect information. Now, Google has said it was inadvertent, but it wasn't just kind of accidentally gathered. And so I do think that that's something that we could look at, and I know Congressman Markey's concerned about it on the Democrat side. Chairman Waxman is concerned about it. So I think that's something in the next Congress that we certainly could look at and maybe put together a bill to prevent that kind of activity from happening in the future.
Congressman Barton, Rick Boucher, an active Democrat on the E&C Committee on Telecommunications, lost. What does his loss do to the committee, in your view?
Well, I'm a Republican, and I'm always happy to get more Republicans and to have a majority. And so, obviously, the gentleman who won over Rick is to be congratulated for his victory. And when you take aside the politics and the mathematics, as a person, there's not a better person in Congress than Rick Boucher, as somebody knowledgeable on these issues of telecommunications, but also energy policy and many of the legal aspects. Congressman Boucher is going to be really, really missed. He was subcommittee chairman on the Energy Committee. He was very active also on the Judiciary Committee. Very bright person, very flexible, and somebody that was willing to work across the aisle. I had the privilege when I was subcommittee chairman back in the majority to have him as my ranking member on the Energy Subcommittee, and he was just very, very a good person to work with. So on the political side, I welcome his successor as a part of the new Republican majority. Obviously work with him. On a personal, take the politics out of it side. Rick Boucher is one of the good folks, and is an example of what being a good congressman is. So he'll be missed as a person, but again, on the political side of it, the bigger the Republican majority, the better, and we're certainly pleased that we have a new Republican from that district.
Another big issue is this need for spectrum for mobile broadband, for lots of other uses. There's various bills out there dealing with spectrum. One calls for reallocating a chunk of spectrum known as the D block to public safety officials for a broadband interoperable communications network. Where do you stand on that issue?
That's a very vexing issue. It's a very technical issue. They're depending on your view of government, various proposals on how to deal with it. It's obvious that we need adequate spectrum for our public safety officials. One way to do it is just to allocate it and mandate it. There are other proposals out there to have an auction, what's called an incentive auction, where you create some sort of an incentive for the winner of the auction to voluntarily allocate spectrum for public safety, and then there are kind of proposals in between. I am not an advocate of a mandate. I have advocated, as have almost all the Republicans, for several years, to have an auction that's no strings attached, and then try to deal with the spectrum allocation for public safety in a different way. I'm not an electrical engineer, so I don't really have the technical expertise to go into various types of spectrum and the bandwidth and all of that. But this is obviously something that's been festering for a while, and it is something that we would like to see successfully solved here in the next 2 years, if possible.
Congressman Barton, if you were chairman, could you see the CEOs of companies such as Facebook and Google coming to testify on issues such as privacy in front of the committee?
I think you could almost guarantee that. Just as when I said earlier in the interview that I don't believe Chairman Waxman and Chairman Dingell had been aggressive in oversight over over the Obama administration, if they had focused their guns on the private sector, so to speak. It doesn't mean as a Republican majority that we're just going to focus on the executive branch of President Obama's cabinet and not take a look at the private sector. To use an example, when I was chairman back in 2005 and 2006, we were very aggressive in oversight of British Petroleum. They had an accident in their pipeline up on the North Slope in Alaska, and we had a number of hearings, and we ended up passing new legislation giving the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission additional authority to inspect and regulate the safety aspects of the pipeline systems, not just in Alaska, but everywhere in the United States as a consequence of British Petroleum's negligence. So, I am a free market, private sector congressman. I believe in markets. I believe in free market capitalism. But having said that, you have to have aggressive oversight over the private sector to make sure that they don't develop too much market power and that they do play by the rules. Back in the 1930s, late 20s, early 30s, President Hoover is alleged to have said, the worst thing about capitalism is the capitalist. And so, again, as servants of the American people, Republicans in the majority in the House have a responsibility to the country to not only keep an eye on the Obama administration, we also have to make sure that the private sector plays by the rules. And I can assure you that we'll do that in the Energy Committee. And Speaker Boehner, in a conference call earlier, has assured the incoming chairman of the committees that we're going to take a look in every committee in overseeing the Obama administration and also the jurisdictional private sectors that each committee is responsible for.
Last question from Juliana Grunwald.
Mr. Barton, if you're unsuccessful in your bid to become chairman, I'm assuming you'll stay on the committee, and would you seek a subcommittee chairmanship? And if so, which one?
Well, that's a very rhetorical question. I'm fully engaged in being successful in convincing the Republican conference and the leadership to give me the privilege to be the full committee chairman. So I'm going to focus my efforts on being full committee chairman, and I'm very confident that I'll be successful in that effort. So I'm really not going to speculate on what happens if that's not successful, because I think it will be successful.
And finally, Congressman Barton, how would your chairmanship differ from that of perhaps Fred Upton?
Well, that's a very speculative question. Fred and I are very good friends. We sit side by side for a number of years. He and his family are lovely people, just delightful people. I think the differences between Congressman Upton and myself, I am obviously consistent conservative across the board. Fred tends to be somewhat more moderate, so you'd have a little bit of a philosophical difference perhaps. And I've also been chairman for one term, and I think I'd be able to hit the ground running. Fred has served as subcommittee chairman on a number of the subcommittees, so he certainly has leadership at the subcommittee level. But the American people have given us a 2-year lease to be in the majority in the Congress, and I think that we should put our best team on the field for the next 2 years. And I think that while Fred's very competent and very well qualified, my experience is at a little bit higher level than his, and I would be much more able immediately to run the committee in an effective fashion.
And just to make it known, we have invited Congressman Fred Upton to appear on this program as well. Ranking Republican on the Energy and Commerce Committee and potential chairman, Joe Barton, thank you as always for being on the communicators. We'll look forward to watching the process play out. Juliana Grunwald of Tech Daily Dose, the editor, National Journal, thank you as well.